Should the nation's schools open in the fall and the Supreme Court gives away half of Oklahoma? It's time to get informed, America. Let's go.
You're listening to Get Informed, America, the only true unfiltered show that's fighting fake news and finding common ground. Now, here's your hosts, Dave Okenquist and Rodney Johnson.
Hello and welcome to Get Informed, America, the show that breaks through the mainstream media box to bring you real smart news. Hi, I'm Dave Okenquist, and joining me is the smartest man I know. It's time to call up the smartest man I know, the wizard of wit, of course, Mr. Rodney Johnson. Rodney, great to have you here each and every week to answer my burning questions and going over some of the big stories over the last few days.
Morning, Dave. You always seem so energetic.
I am. I've got a lot of pep in my step. I'm very excited to talk about some of the stuff that's been going on. And one of the things that's been weighing on people's minds, Rodney, just to kick this thing off and to get moving, is this story about the issue of, are we going to go back to school? Are kids going to go back to school in the fall? Of course, a number of colleges have canceled in-person classes or doing the online learning thing, but that doesn't seem to be a complete option yet, at least or it could be. That could be where we're headed for say K through 12. The CDC. I want to highlight a story that you put up on InformedAmerican.com called "Parents See Requirements for Kids Returning to School and Say No Thanks," because after the CDC released, I got a short bullet list here from the CDC. Strict social distancing tactics, all-day mask wearing for most students and teachers. And yeah, goodness, we all suffer the mask, but God, 8 hours. I think 10 minutes is enough for me. Staggered attendance, daily health checks, no gym or cafeteria use. Yeah, because you got to have the mask on. Can't sweat and you can't eat if you're wearing a mask. Restricted playground access, limited toy sharing, and tight controls on visitors to school buildings, including parents. Now, the president was not happy about these these guidelines from the CDC, and then at one point, threatened to potentially withhold funds from schools who don't open. So I'm going to throw this over to you, Rodney. What do you make of the situation? And above all, will we see a normal school year this fall?
Well, you can start at the end. We're not going to see a normal school year. We know that.
Yeah.
And since schools are controlled by states, it's going to be very different depending on what state you're in. And when you look at the CDC guidelines, and students K through 12 can adhere to those guidelines. And I would think the answer is, zero, as in not likely. I go to the store and adults aren't doing it. So I can't imagine what's going to happen with, a bunch of 6-year-olds. Now, at some level, 6-year-olds in a classroom are easier to control than adults because there's a clear authority figure at the front of the room that they pay attention to in most cases. But still, I don't think that the guidelines are going to stick. It's going to be crazy. And I think you're going to have, I believe in that article, it was 60% of parents said that they were interested in keeping their kids home instead, just because it made no sense. And so it's going to be a real mishmash across the country as to states that in public education don't come back or don't come back all the way, and those that do. And the question is, why are you holding them out? Children don't get the disease like adults. The incidence among children is very close to zero. But clearly the idea is you don't want them bringing it back home to their caregivers, to their family, or whatever else.
Right. And the teachers are older, too. You don't want your teaching staff to get...
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so there's not a really good solution here except, some version of not having them there all the time. But that's not what we're set up for. The bigger problem is it's not that kids won't be together. It's that we don't do distance learning effectively. It is not the same as in-person instruction. And so we're not set up to go over homework, to review what you did, to ensure that you mastered the material, and to give you a grade. We're just not.
Yeah.
So many schools at the end of last year gave no grades on homework. And so that does not help you move to the next level. And then there's the other issue of when kids are at home, somebody has to oversee them. So if you're only going back to school 2 days a week, 3 days a week, the other days of the week, your parents are acting as de facto teachers, which holds them back from their job. And that is a complete drag on the economy that we have yet to figure out. We kind of powered through at the end of the last year. The next one, people are going to be looking for more permanent solutions. I think homeschooling is going to get a tremendous bump. We actually had one of our children homeschooling for 1 year. We thought it was great. She did not. She likes the more social aspect of public school. But the way they do it is very effective in joining small groups. And it's that whole thing of if your group remains the same every week, then you become comfortable with that group in terms of, nobody's ill, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And so you create a node. And I think that's what's going to happen in a lot of places, because people are going to be looking for that consistency so they know what their schedule looks like. We need scheduling so that we can go about our daily lives in work and in the economy.
To your point on homeschooling, well, mom and dad are really lame, so not you and your wife. But it does present the same problem, is that not everyone can do it. It's the same issue as needing to work kind of a thing. And I'm struck by, what if little Johnny never brings his mask in? The same kid or are they going to have a whole stock of things that they get thrown out? I mean, the whole keeping up. I agree. Keeping up with all these guidelines these are more like a goal than reality. So we're not going to have a normal school year, but it still sounds like this isn't. We're not any. Here we are here in the beginning of July. We're not all that close to figuring it out and making it work for the majority of people. Then, so we're just going to have to wait and see what happens. Is that
so? The caveat here has been the same since we started talking about this in March. Therapeutic and vaccine. And while we're, out here on the front lines making plans, trying to figure out kids, in the background, hundreds of companies are working on therapeutics and vaccines. Now, the vaccines are not going to be ready by the fall, probably not by the spring, probably not until fall of 2021 in reality in terms of getting it to a lot of people.
Right.
But a therapeutic could be. And that's the thing. If we can get a therapeutic so that a teacher who gets COVID-19 is not at risk of perishing, it changes this dynamic dramatically. And so I can't stress that enough, that as we're watching many companies work towards something that will stop this from being, a fatal disease, that's what's going to get us out of this trap and really get us back on track for consistency. There's a lot of damage to the economy that can't be undone in terms of commercial real estate and bankruptcies by retailers and all sorts of stuff. But getting kids back in school, that really is like turning on a light switch. You can get that done in less than a week.
Good. Yeah. And certainly to both your points on the vaccine and some kind of an effective treatment. Let's hope at least, the second part, which is the treatment, can come quick enough so that you get it, you get sick, maybe you're out of commission for a week or two, but you're not, and you're not in danger of dying
Exactly.
for the vast majority of people. Yeah. So let's hope. Let's hope and pray, actually, that happens so we can all get on with our lives. I'm tired of this. So let's move on, Rodney. It is, I believe the Supreme Court has ended their term, if I'm not mistaken, with a couple of rulings, or rather 3 rulings I want to hit on that come from yesterday. 2 of them, the Supreme Court ruled against the president. One was on the issue of Democrat House members subpoenaing the president's financial records. And the Supreme Court it ruled against the president, but bought him some more time. It kicked the thing back down to a lower court. So this isn't the end of it, although it was technically a loss for the president. The other was the issue of taxes. Supreme Court yesterday ruled that Trump can't block the releases of his taxes. I believe that one's also delayed. So those two rulings against the president, but it's not sort of over yet. So that's what did you make of those 2 things? I didn't get much out of here because it seemed like it was sort of Trump loses, but then we all moved on to the rest of the day. More important news because it wasn't quite definitive. It wasn't like these tax and financial records were coming out tomorrow or something like that.
Right, and to your point, he lost on the idea of Congress really does have subpoena power.
Right,
and they do. However, they have to show that it's for a legislative purpose. And they did not. That's a different issue. They do have the power. They can subpoena the records. He will have to turn them over.
Right. You're not immune. You don't just have blanket immunity. You have to you have to come back and make a better argument for what. Yeah.
But the argument was, well, we are overseeing the IRS and its auditing of presidents. It's like, well, if that's the case, why did you ask for his tax records for the 3 years before he was president? the whole notion of this was a fishing expedition for him specifically as a target.
Well,
we'll come back up to your
yeah.
point. It's been remanded to the lower court to once again have more issues raised. The other ruling was about New York State, which is investigating hush money payments. And
where's this Stormy Daniels again, Rodney?
Well, it's Stormy Daniels and the other woman whose name escapes me. But the point is, they can. But both were remanded back to the lower court for more conversation, more motions, and so this is going past the election. And so the real takeaway isn't that everyone is subject to the law, because we know we're all supposed to be, but we also know it doesn't really hold all the time.
Yeah.
The real takeaway is you will not see his tax returns through either of these venues before the November election. That's kind of the thing.
Yeah, great. Now, just to go back quickly, why the Democrats need the documents from before Trump was president, this is obviously to find evidence that that Putin paid him off. So that's obviously that's there. So that they need to be able to get access to that so they can prove their case. It's really already proven. We just need documents behind it. The second thing is when Trump, whether he loses re-election or wins, but when he's out of office, he will be hounded with prosecution and lawsuits until the day he dies, won't he?
I don't know. It would be unusual for Congress to go after him after he's out of office. They would have to, again, prove a legislative purpose, and that's going to be really, really hard. There may be, of course, attorneys general around the country, states attorneys general who are interested in doing such a thing. But again, they also serve, at the pleasure of a governor and, then voters. And so people are going to move on to other things eventually. Immediately, I imagine he's got, a lot of people who are going to hang on to that hate immediately. But I think within 4 years, people will have moved on because they just forget, right? They just kind of let it go. And it goes for both sides. I mean, we can't forget that when Barack Obama was first elected, Mitch McConnell said that, the number one job, was to essentially block every single initiative he was going to bring in.
Oh, no question.
So it is no secret that on the flip side, that the Democrats, when they got into office in 2018 and took the House, said, look, our job is to basically load this subpoena machine and do whatever we can to just, beat on him for as much as we can, really in 2016 and 18. So.
Yeah, and it worked. It delayed a lot of things, actually. They kind of waited out. I mean, the strategy was to wait out the term with just to clutter it up with nonsense. And
we can't lose sight of the fact that the loser in all of this is us, right? It is taxpayers who actually want things to happen in Washington. I certainly don't agree with, a lot of positions that are taken in Congress by either side, but I recognize that we as voters send these people up there to get some things done. And when they don't do their job, when they essentially spend all of their time trying to stall the other side, they don't stop the hands of time. Things still happen, but it means that we kind of, we've got our fingers on this balloon squeezing it, and it has to pop out somewhere. And where it pops out is in the courts. And so what ends up happening is the courts end up deciding law instead of the legislature, which is a terrible system, but it's the one that we've developed over the last 30, 40 years. And so courts make a lot of law just because Congress won't do their job.
And there's a great example, which is where I was headed next. The story is from CNBC. Judgment from the Supreme Court. Supreme Court says eastern half of Oklahoma is Native American land. Thank you, Congress. This is exactly which was this ruling. The Supreme Court decided to just step in and make law here. Apparently, this one's a head scratcher for me. The highlight here: Supreme Court ruled that a huge swath of the state of Oklahoma is Native American land for certain purposes, siding with a Creek Nation man who challenged his conviction by state authorities in the territory. In the case. The Creek member in Oklahoma court, he was convicted of raping a 4-year-old child on land whose ownership was in dispute in the case. And they ruled that in this one, the decision means that, only federal authorities, no longer state prosecutors, can lodge charges against Native Americans who commit serious alleged crimes on that land, which is literally half of Oklahoma. And is the home to 1.8 million people, including, I believe, at least half of Tulsa, something like that, at least a nice chunk of Tulsa. And of those people, 15% or fewer are Native Americans. Rodney, What the hell? So, I mean, I get that it goes back to a treaty that the Congress was going to dissolve, but never, I guess, quite dissolved it officially. Goes back to the early 1900s. So this is just another like matter of paperwork here. But here we go. Well, at least if you're a Native American, you don't have to worry about state officials arresting you. Is that what the deal is here?
Well,
That's scratcher for me.
Yeah. So this goes back to, the Trail of Tears and moving the 5 nations from essentially Georgia and Alabama over to land in Oklahoma with the treaty that the United States government signed with those 5 Indian nations that said, look, this is your land forever. And those nations, those 5 Indian nations, never agreed to be dissolved. They just never said, oh, that's right, you take it all, right? They did side with the Confederacy during the Civil War, but they were in Oklahoma. But that doesn't mean that you automatically get dissolved. If that was the case, there would be no southern states. And so I found that a bit of a stretch of an argument by the dissenting judges on the Supreme Court that was a case for saying, hey, these nations no longer exist. And then Oklahoma being, brought into the Union in 1907, and the Indians who were, on this land, a lot of the land, being given the right to vote as American citizens, they said, well, hey, clearly they're part of, the American country now. And so they're part of the state of Oklahoma, which means they're no longer part of these Indian nations. It's like, wait a second, they still didn't agree. Just because you're saying there's something different doesn't mean they think there's something different. And so this has been a bone of contention for a long time. In a practical sense, what it means is that, like you said, the Native American citizens who live in the land, and it's not just that area around Tulsa, it's the 5 different regions. If you look at a map of it, it goes all the way down to the Texas border with the Chickasaw Nation. And this is just decided about one. This was a decision about the one around Tulsa, but clearly everybody thinks it's going to roll down to the other 4 nations as well and take the eastern half of Oklahoma. But the Native American residents of that land don't have to pay state taxes, and they are not subject to state law when it comes to some serious crimes like, rape and murder and stuff. They are still subject to the law, but they have to be tried in federal court. And so this gentleman, McGirt, who's clearly a terrible human being, who did rape this 4-year-old and did terrible things to her, he's not getting out of jail. He's just going to have his case retried in federal court instead of state court. Now, he's 71. He was sentenced to more than 1,000 years in jail in state court. Whether or not he gets 1,000 years in federal court, I don't know, but chances are it won't be less than 50, and so he's never going to see the light of day. Practically speaking, it doesn't mean that suddenly Oklahoma has half the land and there are new people driving around with, cars on them that say, property of Indian Nation, whatever. Nobody wants that because the Indians couldn't handle it. The Native American groups couldn't handle it. It brings up all sorts of issues. There will be some fallout. I don't know what it is. It's probably going to be commerce, where the Indian nations can now do more in terms of alcohol and tobacco and gambling because it's considered their reservation land. And so I think they will be allowed to put up those stores pretty much where they want. I mean, I don't know. Nobody knows, but that's kind of what we see as a potential practical outcome. So very interesting. Very interesting.
The whole thing is odd.
The Native Americans been talking about this for, 113 years. And so it was forgotten and has come back.
The system is bizarre to me because, I mean, it's clearly not sovereign land, because if it was, then, well, at least to my, I don't know, obviously the law would be different, but then the federal government, the U.S. federal government should have no business either. If it's actually Indian territory, forget the state. Why is one different than the other? To me, of course they carve things out, and this whole thing seems like a strange carve out to me. You mentioned the dissent that was written by Justice Roberts, who said, none of this is warranted. What has gone unquestioned for a century remains true today. A huge portion of Oklahoma is not a Creek Indian reservation. Congress disestablished any reservation in a series of statutes leading up to Oklahoma statehood at the turn of the 19th century. The court reaches the opposite conclusion only by disregard the, quote, well-settled approach required by our precedents. So that was his opinion. So we'll see. I mean, it's not the end of the world, but it just seems bizarre to me. By the way, Senator Ted Cruz said, this is outrageous. You see, I got a tweet up here saying Neil Gorsuch and the 4 liberal justices just gave away half of Oklahoma. Literally, Manhattan is next. Rodney, do the Manhattan Indians have a potential lawsuit?
Well, first of all, the Manhattan Indians sold it.
Yeah.
And second, they did not have a treaty with the United States government since that happened in the 1600s, long before the United States existed. And so there's a difference in taking land by force, which nations did for all of history.
Yeah, I'd be curious. Maybe did the Creek Indians ever have a treaty with another Native American tribe, and can they come back and sue the Creeks for that land now? Or
I don't know.
I don't.
But the one we know about is the treaty that the United States government signed. They didn't take this land by force. They didn't, go in and annex it in a way where somebody else sold it to them, like the Louisiana Purchase or other things like that.
Right.
This is about them saying, hey, we, as the United States, control this land out here in eastern Oklahoma. We, as the United States, have all this territory that we think that we control. You're within it. Now, that's a conversation in the beginning. That's taken over by force, which of course happened.
Yeah.
But then they said, to stop the fighting, to stop all this craziness that's going on with, the Indian nations and the guerrilla warfare and everything else going on in the 1800s, we're going to give you all of this land that you will have forever. And this is all written down in a treaty. This is easy to find. And then they came back later and said, we changed our mind. And it's like, you know what? That's a problem. And so it's been a long time coming. It's not surprising to me that it happened. And so now the real question is practically what happens to the land and to the people who live there. I don't think it's going to be nearly as big as people are making it out to be, because frankly, nobody wants to upset the apple cart that much.
Yeah, no, I agree. Great points. All right, let's move on to some bullcrap of the week. One of the things we mentioned, you mentioned to me rather before we started, was the New York City skyrocketing applications for retirement. They say, well, but I guess maybe before I get defunded, maybe I could take a good pension deal before before the terms change or something like that, before the situation on the ground changes. Just get out of here. I don't feel like I'm being respected. And a lot of NYC cops are heading for retirement. Rodney, what do you make of this? Is my assessment right? Is there another angle there?
I don't. They're not going to lose money on their retirement. Those benefits are long since contracted. Mm-hmm. I think it's the other aspects of it. One is you're not getting respected on the job, and that's kind of demoralizing. But a much bigger factor, I would think, is who wants to be the cop who's out there at 2 a.m, gets a call, and in the heat of the moment does something that at noon the next day on video is questionable.
Yeah.
And so I think I would be, if I was close to retirement or, of retirement age and I was a New York City cop, I would really be worried about losing my pension unintentionally, going to jail unintentionally. There are some cops who are bad actors, but there are many other cops of the 800,000 United States who are just doing their job, right? They don't have to be wonderful people. I'm sure there are some. They just out there doing their job. And yet we live in a world where we are now scrutinizing every second of what they do with video, looking for fault. I do not know that I could live my life under that sort of microscope, certainly with that type of job. And so I'd probably be looking for the exit myself.
Yeah, I agree with that. And the mayor of New York City, Bill de Blasio, is an absolute clown.
What's your opinion there, Dave?
In my opinion, is an absolute clown. He was just on CNN yesterday. He's continuing to lock down large gatherings, particularly religious gatherings, and then within the same sentence has no problem with protests. It seems to be a very clear, striking First Amendment issue. You can't gather for church, synagogue, or to a mosque or whatever it is you do, but if it's the right thing, if it's the right moral thing, that's okay. And of course, he really stood up for justice yesterday by helping paint a Black Lives mural in front of Trump Tower. So he really is on top of things.
He's the mayor, right? You get a permit, you paint whatever you want. The unequal application of the law is clearly illegal. And he, of course, is being challenged on that. People are suing him. People are now suing the state or the governor as well as the city for the looting and the vandalism because they said that they didn't enforce the law, which again is true.
Well, of course,
we'll see where that comes down.
It's not going to go anywhere because it's okay. That's the thing. Certain things have been deemed okay, and other traditional things are not, and that's it. Time to deal with it.
And to your point, you do get a jury of your peers as you march up, the different appeals, and so it'll be interesting to see what the people of New York think of this.
Rodney, I want to get your opinion on, as I mentioned, the Black Lives Matter mural that Bill de Blasio helped paint in front of Trump Tower, really sticking it to Trump. There was a case here, this came out earlier in the week from the Bay Area. There was a place somewhere in the California Bay Area where there was a Black Lives Matter mural on the street. I'm sure you've seen this. These are popping up in different cities, and the city allowed this. Now, some other couple came and painted over it with black paint. I don't know if you saw this. Mm-hmm. Well, they're being charged with a hate crime for painting over, for vandalizing the vandalism or something. Do you have any, does that make sense to you, or do you think this is an appropriate application of hate crimes law?
Well, let's back up. The notion of a hate crime, I don't understand.
No.
I understand. I know what it is, right? It's obvious what it is, but the crime is still the crime. And to say that a crime is worse because of somebody's motivation, state of mind, or reasoning, I don't know that makes the crime worse. Crimes are still crimes, right? They're still bad. But it means that you have to have a really clear sense of what that person was thinking, and you have to parse out why they intended to go do this. That's really hard. In some instances, it's really easy, right? You get some evidence of somebody was saying things as they were committing a crime. They were yelling things. They have all sorts of stuff on their social media. You can really see that this person had it out for another group based on something about them. But in other instances, they're just saying, no. If anybody does something that affects a group, it's hate. And it's like, well, that can't possibly be true. You still claim it. It can't possibly be true.
Are painted murals a protected class? And did the Supreme Court rule on that this week?
Right. And so this becomes the problem with designating something a hate crime so that you can, heap more punishment on it. I'm not a fan of that because of all of the problems that go into it.
Yeah.
This particular case, it still comes back to that local control. And I know I get back to this often.
That's fine.
That particular mural, as you call it, the painting of Black Lives Matter on that street in California, the people who painted it went to the city. They got a permit. The city issued the permit, and they then painted it.
Correct.
And so this was a legally installed mural on the street that this person, these two people actually, were now defacing. And so I've got no problem with them being charged with defacing a mural installed on a public space. I do have a problem with the fact that, I don't know about this particular city, that many cities are not going after the same crime when other people do it. And it's
come on. That's not true, Rodney. These are peaceful protests. Come on.
And so that's my problem. Again, it goes back to unequal enforcement of the law. Just treat everybody the same. That's the general idea. That's supposed to be what the rule of law means. And so let's go there. So yeah, I would look at this and say, wait a second, let's look at your history of applying your law. And then, by the way, how in the world are you going to prove their state of mind? And if you just say, no, anything that happens to a particular class of people is automatically hate, that's very problematic is a small word for a big problem.
I've heard since I was a kid this idea of two Americas. Well, now we have another version of that now, don't we? Certain people get charged for certain things, and others don't get charged for the exact same thing. So that's really good. We're making a lot of progress here in this country. Rodney, before we get out of here, I want to hit on one other thing you put up on Informed American. This a lot of news coming out for the payroll protection program, the congressional program that was going to go to small businesses. A lot of reporting of who received what came out this week, and you reported on we got some real famous bands like the Eagles, Guns N' Roses, Chris Stapleton, Wiz Khalifa, Imagine Dragons, Lil Jon, Luke Combs, Kip Moore, real people who are dying for cash got some that needed government stimulus, right? But it's not all.
Thank goodness. You look at it, and I went and looked it up. Don Henley's worth an estimated $200 million, as is Axl Rose. And so you kind of scratch your head and say, did they really need my money, taxpayer money? Because remember, payroll protection program, you get a loan, and as long as you use X percentage of it for payroll, the entire thing is forgivable. Now, I will say, as I wrote, I don't think they did anything wrong. There's no accusing them of wrongdoing. My understanding is these bands were touring, and when their tours were shut down, or they were going to be touring, they have used the money to pay the staff that they have for touring, the roadies and everybody else. And so they're doing exactly what it was meant to do, keep people on a payroll who otherwise would not have been on a payroll. It just kind of strikes you wrong to look at it and say, you are individually worth $200 million. And so, but why am I asking that person, Don Henley or Axl Rose or any of these people to take a personal hit when we're not asking everybody to take a personal hit? I don't know. It still strikes me as wrong. I struggle with it. Let's go there.
Yeah, agree 100%. Well, I want to thank you, Rodney, for coming on. I want to thank you all for watching, and I want you all to become informed Americans by subscribing to this channel and letting us know in the comment section below what you thought of these topics that we discussed today. Rodney, everyone can go and get real smart news in their inbox every single day by going to informedamerican.com. And if they do that, what kind of stories can they expect to see in their inbox over the weekend and the coming days?
I think it's going to be COVID. I think we're gonna have a couple of fronts on this one. One is going to be the conversation about going back to school as parents are trying to make plans and say, hey, wait a second, I can't do this anymore. We need a way better idea because I have my normal job to do. And we're going to get more conversations about the next round of stimulus. Certainly both sides say they want to do it. The Democrats say that, $3.5 trillion. And so the Republicans are like, well, we need a way to encourage people to go back to work, not stay on unemployment. And so that's going to be the fight as we get closer to the end of July, because the deadline looming is the end of that $600 per week unemployment bonus from the federal government. That ends on July 31, a mere 3 weeks from now. And so they have to get something done before then. Will they just kick it and say, oh, let's just extend that a month or two? They could, but both sides want to get something done in this session before the summer session ends. So I think that's what we're going to be talking about.
Thanks. For Rodney Johnson, I'm Dave Okenquist telling you to get informed, America.
You've been listening to Get Informed, America, brought to you by the Informed American Radio Network. Please like and subscribe today in order to get new exclusive weekly episodes. Any questions, thoughts, or comments can be sent directly to info@informedamerican.com. And don't forget to visit informedamerican.com to keep up with real, smart news. Until next time, fight fake news and find common ground.